And we're off. Welcome to the Suppress Herald. It is the 6th of October, and we are 30 days out from an election. And hard to believe all this time has gone by. All this propaganda has been flowing over the printing presses at the Suppress Herald, and we're really ramping up now. And we're going to spend a little time here talking about what they've been doing the last couple of weeks. And per usual, 5-1 liberal letters to the editor. It's basically Trump sucks, MAGA sucks, Republicans are bad, or Kamala is great, and everything's fine on the Democrat side. That's pretty much the editorial page. That's the way they call it at the Suppress Herald. And of course, they still think that they're not biased and completely one-sided, which is kind of funny. We're going to start today with this podcast with talking about the stuff they leave out. There's plenty of stuff they put in, but there are a few major issues that have been popped up over the last week or so that have been completely ignored by this Suppress Herald because that's what they do. They suppress real news. They suppress the side of the news that would, in effect, favor conservative views or show liberals in a bad light. There's plenty of that to go around. And, their coverage, I'm not going to get into it, but their coverage of the Vance, J.D. Vance versus the weirdo from Minnesota debate was absolutely pitiful. Anybody that watched that knows that the weirdo from Minnesota has no business in any way, shape, or form being anywhere near the presidency. And it is, you know, beyond belief that they don't share any of the insights that are just so obvious. But we'll leave that one alone. But this is, I think, one of the biggest ones is we've had a major hurricane, tropical storm. By the time it hit North Carolina and Georgia, it was a major tropical storm, dropping tremendous amounts of rain, which led to floods, which led to major catastrophe on the ground. And in a very big way, it's been a lot of talk and a lot of, you know, stuff going on. Trump was on the scene much before Biden or Harris. Joe Biden was sleeping on the beach, literally, in Delaware. Kamala Harris was out raising money in California with her buddies out there in the failed state of California. And Trump was handing out water and bringing attention to the absolutely horrific situation that's going on in North Carolina, Georgia, and beyond. And one of the things that came out was that they don't have a lot of FEMA support there. FEMA was not on the ground right away, and basically all the reporting that from people that actually do report news, which is not the mainstream media, definitely not the Suppress Herald. We're talking about the fact that there was very little federal support. The Federal Emergency Management Association is supposed to be, or agency is supposed to be there first. And you would have think they would have been prepared, but they obviously were not. And so private helicopter pilots and private rescue teams and others have been doing all the heavy lifting for the first basically week of this disaster. And it came out, and I saw this in personally, and this is where the liberals, their catchphrase should be, don't believe your lying eyes. They've been saying this since Obama. Don't believe your lying eyes. Everything's good. And, you've got a situation where Mayorkas, who failed on the border, failed with FEMA now, that is part of his purview. He's failed at everything he does. Well, he came right out and said FEMA was out of money and was not going to be able to handle another storm, which looks like it might be heading into Florida over the next few days. And the White House, and this is an article from the Washington Compost, published in the Suppress Herald. White House, Trump's false disaster claims poison. The Republican nominee said the government couldn't fund disaster response. A White House memo condemned bald-faced lies. Really? Well, they go right here, the White House denying. It is paramount that every leader, whatever their political beliefs, stop spreading this poison, White House spokesman Andrew Bates wrote in a memo, adding, this isn't about politics, it's about helping people. Really? If it was about helping people, Biden wouldn't be sleeping on the freaking beach in Delaware while all these people are drowning, dying, and in absolutely horrific situation where more people have died over time while he was sleeping on the beach. So don't tell us that. It's basically they diverted $1.4 billion from FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency, to take care of house and clothe and feed illegal immigrants. And I want to stress they're illegal immigrants. And the White House is in denial of that. And it's really, you know, as president, Trump diverted nearly 10 million in funding from FEMA to U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement to use for detention programs in 2018. Yeah, there was an emergency management situation at the border, which he then corrected. That was in 2018. And 10 million is a whole lot different than a 1.4 billion dollars. And this is because they've opened the border wide open and had to use that money for emergency housing. Harris does not disperse FEMA funding as vice president. The claim about using disaster relief funding to house immigrants is false, and FEMA has the funds needed to respond to Helena, Bates said at the White House memo. Really? Well, if you do a little digging, which, the Press Herald and the rest tend not to do, what did they do with their funding? This is a Rasmussen reports, and this is 6 headlines with information. This is right from the FEMA. 5 out of these 6 are from FEMA's own press or whatever releases. Department of Homeland Security announces 350 million in additional funding to communities receiving migrants. 350 million. Then Department of Homeland Security announces distribution of more than 77 million in congressional funding for communities receiving migrants. Department of Homeland Security announces distribution of more than 12 million in funding. FEMA awards 110 million to the Emergency Food and Shelter Program to assist migrants. Political, New York City to get 104 million from FEMA for asylum seekers. Department of Homeland Security announces 300 million in direct funding to communities receiving migrants. And 100, okay, trouble seeing this because it's very fine print. That's another 140 million for a new competitive awards process. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of million. It adds up to $1.4 billion. This is the front page of the New York Post, okay? New York Post does their homework. They're an actual news organization. Let us recall the New York Post published an article regarding the Hunter Biden laptop, which the deep state tried to bury and label it as a Russian disinformation. So this is that same New York Post. Con before the storm. Fed says there's no money left for hurricanes after it spent 1.4 billion on immigrants. This is straight from Mayorkas. That's a quote. He's on video saying exactly that. And here's the Suppress Herald printing this garbage from the compost, the Washington compost, lying to the American people, just basically propagandizing that, oh, nothing to see here. That's what they leave out. Lies and disinformation come from the mainstream media. Here's another story that nobody, unless you go look for it, is talking about. Probably should. They have proven in court 3,930 double counted ballots were intentionally and fraudulently added by pulling ballots from multiple different batches to create new batches days after they were originally scanned. This is in Georgia. Of the 17,852 missing ballot images in Georgia, this is from 2020. A large majority were intentionally deleted or results were injected not by scanning a real ballot. In other words, intentionally, they cheated and stole an election in Georgia. And the truth, the facts, and the data are coming out, the proof. But you are not going to see that in the Suppress Herald or any other mainstream media. They're hiding what happened in 2020, and you wonder why people wonder if it was legit. And here's, I think, one of the biggest stories that's been suppressed in a major way in this Suppress Herald, the mainstream media across the board. An ICE report. Now, this was requested by a congressman in a letter to Texas Representative Tony Gonzalez, U.S. Representative, on Friday. ICE revealed a shockingly high number of illegal migrants with murder and rape convictions are currently roaming the country. The data says, this is from ICE, the government organization, the U.S. government. The data says among those not in detention, in other words, free and roaming the country, there are 425,000 plus convicted criminals and 222,000 with pending criminal charges. That's over 640,000 either convicted criminals or accused criminals, people with criminal charges. Of those, 62,000 plus convicted of assault, 14,301 convicted of burglary, 56,000 plus with drug convictions, and 13,099 convicted of homicide, murder. An additional 2,500 of kidnapping convictions, and 15,811 sexual assault convictions. There are an additional 1,845 with pending homicide charges, accused of murder, almost 43,000 with assault charges. It's unbelievable. And this is ICE in that letter blamed sanctuary cities for this. And yet that was buried when that came out. That was on Fox News. That was on a few, you would find that on real news organizations. You would not find that anywhere in the mainstream media. They've been covering it up and denying it because immigration is such a disaster for the Biden-Harris administration, and Kamala Harris was the border czar. So, one last thing on the suppression of the news, and then we'll just do a quick kind of review of some of the stuff that's come out. And basically, the one-way show that we've got is the Suppress Herald in the way they cover news. This is unbelievable. This is just a small little clip that you see in the papers. It's in the, believe it or not, the sports section of all things. And here's the article. Volleyball. The Utah State women's volleyball team has become the fourth program to cancel a game against San Jose State for reasons that have not been specified. I'll come back to that. The Aggies announced Wednesday the decision to forfeit their October 23rd Mountain West Conference game. Boise State already forfeited its game on September 28th against the unbeaten Spartans, 9-0, 2-0 Mountain West, and Wyoming followed suit this week, announcing the game slated for Saturday was now a 3-0 forfeit win for San Jose State. For reasons that have not been specified. This is a blatant BS lying crap that's supposed to be news. The reason is San Jose State has a guy on the women's volleyball team, a stud who's hurting people. He's hurt one woman, apparently. That's what I heard. These guys playing women's sports are hurting women, assaulting them, basically. And it's an unfair situation. Unspecified reason, my ass. They know damn well what the reason is. It's all over the place if you're willing to look. But this paper, the Suppress Herald, printed this garbage in unspecified. We don't want to tell anybody what the real reason is because you know it's a winning conversation for conservative voices, for reasonable, common sense voices, I would inject. That's the Suppress Herald at its absolute worst. And they continue to do it, and they think they should get awards. And this is, this is just, I'm going to just pick some articles that have been in the paper over the last couple of weeks. We're just catching up. This is the aftermath of Hurricane Helena. As death toll mounts, rescue efforts are underway across the southeast. And it just talks in general about what's going on. And then they get down toward the end. As the scale of the damage and the death toll become clear, former President Donald Trump flew to the southern Georgia city of Valdosta on Monday and attempting to leverage the catastrophe, criticized the Biden administration's response. He's trying to just point out that the Biden administration, including Kamala Harris, are inept idiots. From the top, they're inept. They've been absolutely incapable of managing the border. They've been incapable of managing the foreign affairs, the Middle East. Look what they did in Afghanistan. These people are absolutely inept. And that's all Trump is saying. And this paper should be saying the same thing if they were doing their job, because I've been watching coverage on Real News, and it is despicable how bad FEMA has done, how long it's taken them to get there, and what kind of response they're giving. And here it is. Trump falsely claimed that Georgia Governor Brian Kemp had not been able to speak to President Biden. Kemp said that was not true. That's a lie. We've since found out, garbage more, we've since found out that Kemp was not able to get a hold of him. They played phone tag, but he was not able to have that conversation. They report that they did, and they reported a quote from Kemp, although there's no quotation marks. They lied, trying to score points. And I'm just going to go rattle right through. These are just articles that just keep coming through, and it's all extremely one-sided on everything. Vance appears at Christian nationalist event. What the hell is a Christian nationalist? It's a group, it's an organization. Pastor Jason Howard to talk about drug addiction and answer questions from pre-selected audience members. And it basically smears people and Vance for associating with it because they're Christians. And they just make up a story. This has been done before. And basically they hate Christians anyway. So anybody that believes in their faith, believes in God, in their mind should be basically called a Christian nationalist. Oh, and that's from the Washington Compost. So the Suppress Herald gets all of their totally slanted pieces from the Compost. Here's a Trump campaign optimistic, unbridled, disordered. With just a few weeks to go, focus and self restraint have gone by the wayside. In other words, we're just going to slam the Trump campaign, even though he's going out all across the country, barnstorming the country with tens of thousands of people at every venue, doing multiple ones. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris is hiding from everybody. She goes to fundraisers with her buddies and hides and doesn't talk to anybody but friendly reporters, and she can't even do that well. And it's Trump's campaign that's disordered and everything else. And oh, this is the Washington Compost, which is what all this Suppress Herald newspaper should be, compost. And here it is. Harris strikes measured contrast with Trump's contentious appearance before black journalists. This was the most embarrassing. her appearance with black journalists was a joke. And this is basically grooming it up to make it look like it was good. And it's just more garbage. But this is, she was an embarrassment with those black journalists. And if anybody had any quotes, they would show that. But that's not what you're going to be told. Again, nobody watches the real thing. If you are watching it on a video and saw what she was saying and how foolish she looks and how ill equipped to be president she looks, you would not write that article. But that is about propaganda, smoothing it over and make it look like Trump was contentious. Yeah, Trump said, "Well, I don't know. She's calling herself black this week. She was calling herself Indian before." He's saying the truth. They just don't like it. Here's a good one. Support for Trump overlooks and dismisses sexual abuse. There's another Suppress Herald famous one. Kamala Harris's husband, Emhoff, has a credible accusation from his girlfriend at, I believe, Cannes Film Festival, whatever, where he basically slapped her, assaulted her because she was talking to the valet or something, and that was the end of it. Their relationship ended that night, and he's denying it. And the newspapers, if that was Trump or a Republican, it would be front page. They'd run with it whether it had any basis or not. What I have been seeing is that he's Emhoff has denied it, but you got to look at who the guy is. He knocked up the nanny for his kids in his previous marriage. So the headline is support for Trump overlooks and dismisses sexual abuse. Isn't knocking up your nanny sexual abuse? Isn't that taking advantage of a young woman? One-sided. Here we have special counsel lays out January 6th evidence. So this is the day after the Vance decimation of the weirdo from Minnesota. The special counsel, Jack Smith, had a big release of all of his evidence against Trump in the insurrection case, January 6th case. And they just take some juicy tidbits of some, supposed quote from somebody during that whole thing. And what they don't tell you is that the judge and Jack Smith are working very hard to get this out there before the election, when typically, one, you don't have an extended, there's a term for it, Yeah. This is the highlighted section on this article. Prosecutors painted a vivid portrait of how Trump refused to issue a public statement to calm supporters as they breached the Capitol until all his aides eventually left him alone in the White House dining room where a television was tuned to Fox News. Let me tell you something. They were going after the people that had set this up, and I do believe that there well could be incitement by FBI informants and undercover and so forth, that this whole thing was staged. That was underway while Trump was still making a speech at the Ellipse. And, to blame this on him, that it all got going because of him, is just ridiculous. This happened, if it's legit, because Democrats stole an election in the hearts and minds of 50 million plus Americans and a lot beyond that. And they were not given the opportunity to dig into the evidence that things weren't right. But regardless, the defense is typically the one who goes first in the release of that information. The judge decided to let Jack Smith throw his entire 135 pages or whatever it is out there to get it out there as quickly as possible. Election interference, and it is absolutely despicable. But you won't hear any of that in that article, that they went outside of normal procedure and allowed Jack Smith to go first. Moving on. Opinion page. Governor Walz's teachings extend beyond the classroom. Front page of the opinion page in the Sunday paper, a big article about how wonderful Governor Walz, Weirdo Walz, was in all his time in the National Guard and all the rest. Even though he had stolen valor, he lied about his rank when he retired. There's nothing in here about him running away when his unit was deployed to Iraq. He decided it was time to retire and run away. The guy is a yellow-bellied coward. I don't care what your service is up till that point. When the going gets tough, when you run away, you are not fit to be a leader of the country and the commander in chief. And the vice president is one heartbeat away from that. So I'm sorry, but this is just a puff piece trying to fix the mess that he created in that debate. And it is just another one-sided article in the newspaper. There's no one. Harris outspending Trump, yet polls continue to show you two major party candidates for president running neck and neck. They're going to try and keep it neck and neck no matter what, because if you're going to steal an election, you got to have it believable. So the polls are always going to be neck and neck right up to the end. But there's really a big thing about why Kamala Harris is raising so much money. It's not that she's raising money for her campaign, it's raising money against his campaign. Think about it. You've got all these people in the pharmaceutical industry. Don't forget, RFK is in the wings, RFK Jr. If you've read The Real Anthony Fauci by RFK Jr., or you have some insight into what he knows about the pharmaceutical industry and what Fauci did and all the rest, all the way to Bill Gates and others, especially Bill Gates, you'd be funding Kamala Harris too if you were the likes of Bill Gates and all those people in the pharmaceutical industries. They are pumping money into her campaign because they're scared to death of what's coming for them when the truth comes out on a lot of things. And here's another article, Election 2024. They label all these Election 2024. Trump condemns filing, but lawyers disagree. Legal experts say Special Prosecutor Jack Smith's January 6th evidence was made public because a judge ordered it. What they don't do is tell you that the judge ordered it, breaking precedent, breaking regular procedures, breaking with what is normal is the defense goes first. And she got it out there because voting starts now. And again, on Thursday, J.D. Vance took down Weirdo Waltz. Here's another article. Federal judge lets student loan relief proceed. The judge cuts Georgia out of a lawsuit challenging the loan forgiveness program and will transfer the case to Missouri instead. Nowhere in here does it say that he just took Georgia out of it because they didn't have standing, and that the Supreme Court has said you can't do this. You can't take hundreds of millions, billions of dollars without going to Congress. And this is none of this is written in here. It's just all, oh, this is also election interference by the mainstream media, giving all of these poor students with loans or former students with loans thinking they're going to get loan relief and using them as pawns. Vote for us. We're going to buy your vote with loan relief. And it's not going to happen because they're going to move this to Missouri, and the Missouri Attorney General is going to file with the courts in Missouri, and they're going to put an injunction on it because the Supreme Court's already decided it. None of that in the article. Helena pulls climate into election discourse. The vice presidential candidates had no choice but to talk about the hurricane and response. And hurricanes in a warming climate would typically be less. It's colder weather that drives those hurricanes. And that's from science. Do your homework. But of course, you have to have climate thrown into it all. And then here's a puff piece. This is on Saturday, October 5th. We're getting down to it. How Biden helped end a strike that imperiled Democrats. It's a whole article all about all the things he did. The reality is, all he had to do was make one phone call and say, I'm just going to shut you down using the such and such act, which was invoked by President Trump, or excuse me, by President Reagan first with the air traffic controllers. It was also invoked by President Bush, George W. Bush, and something as critical as the ports, food, and all the other things, fuel, all the rest of it that come in and out of ports, shutting down the country was not acceptable. But they wrote a whole article, and oh, it's the Washington Compost. And this is one that's really rich. This gets printed in there. Biden hardens asylum limits at border. The Biden administration said Monday it is making asylum restrictions at the southern border even tougher as it's increasingly eager to show voters uneasy over immigration that it is taking a hard stance on border security. It's a little freaking late, isn't it? It's unbelievable, but the press is going to trumpet this out there and make this story. This isn't going to affect people hardening asylum limits. There are tens of thousands of people streaming across the border that nobody's even checking. So the asylum thing is just irrelevant. But they're not telling you that. That's a election tampering by the Suppress Herald and the rest of the media. This is a really good one. Man charged with threats to justices. I've raised this issue many times. There have been multiple, over months, articles and editorials and all the rest going after the conservative Supreme Court justices, trying to take them down, attacking them. Man charged with threats to justices, a 76-year-old from Alaska, was arrested based on 465 messages he allegedly sent to Supreme Court judges. Nowhere in here Did they say that who those judges are? You can infer it. You have to, and you know who it is. It is conservative justices he was threatening. Just like the litany of accusations and media and all the rest that the media have been putting out there about Trump have put his life in danger with people trying to assassinate him. You have these Supreme Court justices now with their own lives in peril. One, because Garland, the most inept, despicable, I don't know what you call him, head of the Injustice Department, did nothing when there were people threatening the Supreme Court justices at their homes, protesting in front of their homes, which is against federal law, very plainly, yet they did nothing. And you had someone trying with an intent to assassinate one of the Supreme Court justices, Brett Kavanaugh, with a gun, with an intent to assassinate him. And these people did nothing. It's despicable. And this is a result, man charged with threats to justices is a result of the media, the Suppress Herald and others, spewing this stuff nonstop, criticizing the Supreme Court. It's really absolutely ridiculous. I'm going to finish today with, you know, I love how the lamestream media likes to pat themselves on the back for how great they are. This is in the Suppress Herald, which is the main trust for local news. Main Trust for Local News wins New England First Amendment Public Occurrences Awards. So they won awards for the First Amendment. And they put all in here about all the great stuff they did, filing FOIA requests and all the rest about the mass shooting we had in Brunswick, Maine. And that's the basis of this. They love to toot their own horn. And their new thing now is to have Newsroom Live. They're doing these promotional things. They've got one coming up with all the editorial board from the Suppress Herald, all no doubt getting around and having a mutual pat on the back session, probably get in a circle and pat everybody on the back and say how great they are and how editorial, they got everything right. And then they've got another one. This is a Newsroom Live event. Local news is essential to democracy, their democracy. Local news is essential to Democrats, is what they really mean. Meaningful participation in civic life is impossible without it. However, local news is in crisis. According to one widely cited study, some 2,500 newspapers have closed over the last generation. And there's a book out that's called What Works in Community News by a couple of writers, a couple of actually liberal news people. And this is going to be, patting themselves on the back for the likes of the national distrust of local news, which is billionaires buying up all the newspapers in the country. And you've got George Soros just with a really fast tracked through the federal election or the now the anyway, people that manage the airwaves just approved him buying over 200 radio stations. George Soros buying up all the newspapers and buying up radio stations. What does this do for our freedom of speech and for keeping the government honest? And these people have no idea why all these papers are closing. It's because they only have half of their audience because the other half distrust them and don't respect them and know that it's all just propaganda. Why would I buy propaganda? The only reason I do is so that I can share that it's propaganda and demonstrate it on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, just by going through and seeing how slanted all this is, how one-sided all this is, and how they're not telling you what you really need to know, which I've shared some of today. So that's where we're at. We're getting ready for an election. It's 30 days out, and the propaganda is ramping up like there's no tomorrow because Kamala is a really bad candidate, and weirdo Waltz isn't helping, and things are a disaster. And they have to cover it all up, get it over the finish line, try to tell us everything's great. Don't believe your lying eyes. Trust us. And we're not buying it. So don't forget, politics is local, and so is propaganda.